elder to Bradley Manning. It's no. That act helped end the Vietnam War. He's currently writing a book on U.S. nuclear weapons policy, as well as issues of government secrecy and the power of whistleblowers. Please welcome Daniel Ellsberg.
It's good to be back with these friends. It's not wonderful to be back on this occasion in a way. Louis Vitale was just saying to me, I don't know if he wants me to quote him, but he feels disgusted when this year rolls around every year and we find that we're just as far, we're as far from assuring the survival of all of this, of the human species, as we were before. Now, how can I say that? After all, haven't we reduced weapons very significantly or in a very large scale? Feeding back here. And the answer is no. We've reduced weapons around the world, in the two countries, or even in one country, will surround the Earth, block the Earth's sunlight, and cause mass starvation, not on the level of tens or hundreds of millions, but essentially everyone. In other words, most species would die. Some humans might live on. We're so adaptable. Fishing, as one of the physicists told me, in some remote island somewhere, there might be 1 million, there might be 10 million, but most people would be gone. And this is as a result of a false alarm or of an escalation of the weapons that President Obama proposes, the man who got the Nobel Prize in the prospect that he would end the nuclear era, proposes to keep on alert for an indefinite period, as he said, beyond his lifetime, and really indefinitely, because looking at a world where the U.S., the strongest nation in the world, feels permitted and obliged to keep this nuclear winter capability of thousands of weapons, and more than 1,000 when you look at them all together on reserve, we can't tell other countries, and we aren't effectively telling other countries they can't have one, so this goes on. What's the mentality of people who can imagine, or can propose actually, and fund this sort of world-destroying, not literally world-destroying, simply humanity-destroying and other species-destroying capability? I'm reminded this morning of something that I suspect even this hardcore group of patient people may not have heard of. How many of you have actually heard of the concept of atmospheric ignition? I'd like to see hands, because I suspect there's some. I see 3, 4, 5. Atmospheric. How many have not heard that? Let me introduce you to this notion, because when I was a kid, there used to be films about mad scientists, and even when I was in my teens, and that was regarded as a very unfair kind of characterization of the kind of people who've been keeping us safe all these years and providing our security. The fact is that in June of 1942, that is before even you were born, the scientists of the Manhattan Project, of what was to be the Manhattan Project, gathered together in Berkeley to do the first theoretical discussions of how the bomb, what the bomb's basic design would be. Edward Teller put on the board, the later like to be known as the father of the H-bomb, but he put on the board some calculations of what the heat generated would be by this first little bomb, as he well put it. The kind of bomb, the atomic bomb, fission bomb, which is the trigger for all of the 1,500 or 1,000 thermonuclear weapons that have replaced them. As you know, when you see the devastation of Hiroshima or Nagasaki, you're looking at what happens to a city when the detonator, the percussion cap of a modern thermonuclear weapon is exploded over that city, with the H-bomb being the earlier ones being 1,000 times more powerful. Well, they looked at the fission bomb at that point in 1942, and as it's described by people who were there, at first there was interest in the bomb. They were very startled at the amount of heat that would be released. And within seconds, even within a minute, the expressions of the people changed very much, because the physicists there, who were many Nobel Prize physicists, realized that that heat might be capable of fusing the atoms of nitrogen in the air and the hydrogen in the sea, and that within a microsecond, everything would go. There would be a flash visible to anybody who could see such a thing throughout much of the cosmos, and everything would be gone in one flash. They called it ignition of the atmosphere and also of the seas. They couldn't see that that was wrong. Now, within days, they discovered that Teller, who was a great physicist, had made an arithmetic error on the coupling of the explosion with the atmosphere, and that wasn't certain to occur. But before they had discovered that, they had decided that everything must stop here while they checked this with Thompson, who was in charge of the program. So in those days, Oppenheimer was not allowed to go by plane in case of a crash. He went by train to where Compton was in a fishing lodge somewhere, and then bus, train, this and that. And he finally got out to Compton's fishing lodge, explained this to Compton, and Compton said, if there is any significant chance that this could happen, we cannot go on with this process. He said, better, then an amazing thing that's probably never said again during the war, better that we live under the Nazi heel than that we bring down the curtain on humanity. As I say, probably the one time that people suddenly had it in their heads that there was something possibly even worse than the horrors of a Nazi occupation with its Holocaust and everything else, but something could even be actually worse. So they came back and did more calculations, and finally what they realized was they could not prove that this could not happen. Or was it not demonstrable? It was unlikely. So finally they gave it what was called a nominal calculation of 6 parts in a million, and that was acceptable. They thought they could live with. Now, during the Manhattan Project then, young physicists working on the problem continually kept rediscovering this possibility as they were working on their part of the problem. And they would come to the leaders of the project and they would say, there's a real possibility here that this ends everything. And they would say, don't worry, we've looked into that, the calculations have been made, it's all right. And really the word was that in many histories deal with this at all, they say actually it was proved that it was impossible for this to happen for a fission bomb. And that was proved, but only after the war. I've actually seen the declassified calculation by Edward Teller again in 1946, and they still hadn't proved it impossible. It was not until more tests had been made eventually that they finally decided. And that means when the Trinity test occurred at Alamogordo, they weren't sure just what would happen. And Fermi, the greatest experimental physicist of them all, was giving odds the night before the test went off. He said, I can now in a position to make book on 2 possibilities. One, that the state will be destroyed, and 2, that the entire atmosphere of the world will be destroyed. And remember, this test was taking place after Germany had surrendered. At most, you were hoping to shorten the war by this, but you were willing to take a possibility that everything went. The same thing arose with the H-bomb. Once again, they could not prove at the beginning that the fusion bomb would not have this effect. And once again, Compton, to his credit, said, we've really got to be sure of this one. And once again, these scientists and their leaders, and I'm not sure how many of them ever really knew of this possibility, went ahead with that possibility, with the H-bomb possibility. What I'm saying is, this, I think, should give you a little sense of the priorities and the values of the people, and not just that they were physicists, their bosses, the political leaders, that for some kind of short-term advantage, they were really willing to risk it all. That's happening right now under President Obama. The problem is not that all life on the earth will be vaporized. That's not the problem. The greatest biomass in the world is bacteria, and much of that will remain, and the viruses, and some insects, and some grasses. But all primates, all mammals, most humans, the most adaptable of all these creatures, will go. That will all go. The vegetation, the animals that rely on vegetation, not in one day, but in a matter of months, much less than a year. The global food supplies for the people right now, we live year by year, harvest to harvest, and the global food supplies are 30 to 60 days. Cut out the harvests which our current alert forces will destroy by the effects on the sunlight, and all the animals that feed on vegetation and all the animals that feed on the animals, predators, go. It's all go. And this is a prospect that even our present president, far from the worst that we've had, is willing to live with, and something that could happen like tomorrow or today as we speak, in terms of the kinds of false alarms that we've actually had. One last thing I'd like to make, at 8:15, we're going to observe the moment when human history and the history of all creatures on Earth, really, large creatures, larger than bacteria, changed. There was a cut in history at that point, before and after. And it's true that since Nagasaki, there have been many, many tests, and many people have died of them, but no actual war has occurred. A friend of mine, at Rand Corporation, in I think it was 1960, over 60 years ago, told me nothing will really change until there's another explosion, and that will wake people up, and they will really get serious about this and do something about it. I have never in all those years been willing to wait for that possibility, because it so happens not only will that mean the deaths of many, many people immediately, I am not at all confident that that will be the awakening point. If we haven't awakened till now, I think people will clutch to authority. There will be police states to prevent any other such terrorist attack or whatnot, and the likelihood is that the arms race will go on. So I don't think that will be the big change. We have had this much time to do better and have not made use of it. Something that when I was in Hiroshima, now I want to get to, that brought something home to me very much about what's at stake here. What is at stake? For one thing, it was at Hiroshima, I think it was the 50th anniversary. We were sitting in a civil disobedience the morning of August 6th, this day, and I was sitting next to somebody who had actually been at Hiroshima when the bomb had gone off, and he'd been in his teens then, at that point, and he had in fact lost an eye from glass flying from this. So he was sort of recalling this, and I happened to have the honor of sitting next to him as the police were ranged before us. We were blocking something or other, I've forgotten. One thing has always stuck in my mind. It was a ferocious heat that day. We were sweating, and it was really almost unbearable. It was a very, very, very hot day. And he just murmured to me, it was hot that day too. And I thought, wow, of course, August 6th, same day, same conditions, that hadn't changed. The fires that killed people there on that day from the firestorm were on top of heat of this sort. Somehow that brought something home to me that was difficult otherwise. But one other thing was that when I looked at the Hiroshima Museum, having always heard that the bomb dropped at 8:15, as we will observe today, there was a watch Actually, there were a number of clocks that had been stopped at that moment by the blast and the fire. And I looked at the watch, which was half melted, and it didn't seem to be, the watch part was intact, and it didn't seem to have stopped at 8:15. It seemed closer to 8:16, oddly. And I thought, well, that's funny. How could that be? So I looked up the history of it, and I discovered that 8:15 is when the bomb dropped from the airplane. But it was on a parachute to give the plane time to get away, and it came down, and it actually exploded at 8:15 and 43 seconds. Now, that led me, and I want to do a little experiment here today, and I'm going to ask you to do this. When I say start, close your eyes and think about what might have been happening during those 43 seconds before the bomb, before history actually changed. Because remember, it was an ordinary morning. People were going to school. Kids were eating breakfast, ready to go to school. Husbands and wives were lying in bed together for a last nap. There were some people working already. And it was an ordinary day. They saw one plane going over. They thought that was not a serious problem. I think there'd been an earlier alert, and they came out of the shelters and were going around their business. Actually, the bomb was now on its way. It really was unstoppable at that point. Over Nagasaki, a few days later, plane had come and gone, actually, because the cloud cover was too great. So things weren't inevitable until the bomb actually drops. And then the change has not taken place immediately. I'm going to ask you right now, and I'll tell you when 43 seconds have gone on. If you would, close your eyes right now. And think about what may have been happening during that period. The bomb is falling. And then the world changed. It was a long time, wasn't it? Longer than we expected. Think of what could have happened then. Children saying goodbye to their parents as they went to school. Time enough to be making love to a loved one. For a lot to be going on, actually. What struck me about that was every minute, every 43 seconds of what we enjoy here, about here, and us, is precious. It doesn't have to be 100 years, it doesn't have to be 50 years. That minute of life is a miracle. And the reason that we're here, and that I know many of you here have been doing this for a long time, have been doing what you can to stop this juggernaut that is being kept oiled and moving along by the others. And I think as we simply need to hold hands or know each other, hug each other, and understand this is what it's all about. That we are people who understand that there is no political purpose on earth that justifies the risks our leaders are taking in our name and in a number of countries right now to end all this. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Okay. So we have a little bit of time before the siren goes off, and so we want to invite Marilia Kelly to come up and speak to us a little bit. She's